All right, we're back for the second part of the lecture on race and racism, where we talk about the tools of prejudice. Pay special close attention to the discussion about selective perception. Very important. All right, back to the year 2020.
Okay. This part about the tools of prejudice is a little bit more involved, and this is about how we use um, tools of prejudice, how these things sort of manifest against different groups of people. And so here we go. The tools of prejudice. I think there's like four or five of them, something like that. The first one is, and I'll maybe have some text to make it look really good. The first one is the concept of something we've already been talking about all quarter long, is the notion of socialization. That we are socialized by our five socialization agents. Remember, family, school, religion, peers, and media. That we are socialized around the ideas of race and racism. In fact, here's an important term I want you to know because you may see it again on the final. The concept of internalized white supremacy. I'm pretending the words are right there. Internalized white supremacy. That not only do we learn about race from our parents and from the TV and from, all our friends, but we internalize a message, kind of like the way we internalize a message about gender called patriarchy. We internalize the notion that whiteness is normal and whiteness is better. And we see this, even if you don't think of yourself as a white supremacist, you've internalized this notion of white supremacy at a very early age, just by seeing white as the sort of normal standard. But think about how people of color, and we're going to come back to this topic in a little bit, are told to be white, to act white, to be acceptable, to speak white, to look white, to have your hair white and your skin white, to maybe lighten your skin or fix your eyes, to look more white. I mean, Asian people have been offered this wonderful surgery that they can do on their eyes to make them look more like Caucasian people. I mean, that's a notion of internalized white supremacy. There are these incredible videos of interviews with little girls, 5 and 6 year old girls, and you take a group of African American girls and you give them some baby dolls, and you have some white baby dolls and black baby dolls, and you say, we're going to talk about baby dolls, and you do the same thing with white girls, little white girls, white baby dolls, black baby dolls, and it's pretty powerful to see. So what these videos show you, it's based on a famous experiment. You ask the white girls, which of these baby dolls is the prettier doll? And they pick up the white doll. Which of the dolls is the uglier doll? And they pick up the black doll. Which of the dolls looks the most like you? And they pick up the white doll. Then you ask the little black girls, which of the dolls is the prettier doll? They pick up the white doll. Which of the dolls is the uglier doll? They pick up the black doll. Which of the dolls looks like you? And they pick up the black doll. I mean, it's just gut-wrenching and kind of like ethically challenged. But it shows you how early children internalize this notion of white supremacy. I was watching, here we go, here's a story. I was watching last week The Family Feud with my daughter Cozy, who's 5, and it was an African American family and a white family. And I noticed she was not rooting for the white family, but against the black family. I said, Cozy, what's going on? She's like, I don't want them to win. Why? I don't know. And I'm like, Cozy, first of all, your mother's brown and you're biracial. I know, and you have a ton of black friends. I know, but it was clear that at 5, she was already picking up on these clues that white is better. Like, it's just kind of freaking me out that I've raised a white supremacist already at age 5. I might have to do something about that. But it was just her picking up on cues. It wasn't, she's not a white supremacist, but she is internalizing these messages about race at a very early age. So the first thing is that we just learn it. We just learn it. It's deep inside us. We learn these messages very early on. And later, if you have an opportunity to look into the issues of implicit bias, for example, it's an explanation of how that can manifest in some pretty ugly ways. So the first tool of prejudice, bing, is socialization and the notion of internalized white supremacy. The second tool of prejudice is the idea of stereotypes. Stereotypes are broad generalizations, typically about categories of people. Now, we have to be careful here because what we do in sociology is we generalize all the time. When we look at our findings and we find that, generally speaking, the more education that you make, or more education that you get, the more money that you will make. That is a generalization. Obviously, there are people with a lot of education that don't make any money, and there's people with no education that make a ton of money. Miley Cyrus comes to mind for some reason. So, but these are sort of generalizations that sort of hem people in. And if you think about all your racial and ethnic stereotypes, Muslim terrorist, black criminal, one of my favorites, lazy Mexican. Like, that was the stupidest stereotype. Do these people not know any actual Mexican people? Not lazy. Which will come up on a little bit later. But what we're doing here is something that we call selective perception. Selective perception. Write that down because it's definitely on the final exam. Selective perception is how we look for things that reinforce our stereotypes. How we look for things that confirm our biases. Sometimes it's called confirmation bias. How we look for things that sort of prove that we're right about our stereotypes. And the way that we best sort of describe this is with a fourfold table. Another fourfold table. What would you do without the fourfold tables? So let me first sort of describe what we mean when we're talking about a stereotype. A stereotype is about a group of people. So we start with a particular group of people, black, white, whatever, Muslim, Hindu, Southern Baptist. I mean, pick your favorite group of people. A group of people that have a particular attribute. Mexicans, lazy. I don't know where that comes from. So it's about sort of these two things, the group of people and the attribute. So let's do the fourfold table, shall we? Okay, here we go, drawing fourfold table, starting out again with our blank fourfold table. So we have the group. Yes, you're a member of the group. No, you're not. Boop, boop, boop. And then we have the attribute. Yes, you have the attribute, and no, you don't. So let me tell you how this works. This is selective perception. And by the way, let me tell you, I was an intro sociology student my freshman year in college. I was pre-med, took a sociology class because I was bored. And some of the stuff, was really mind-blowing. But really, this concept of selective perception is the one thing that stuck with me more than anything in that first sociology class I ever had. This is the thing that I really still use now, and I talk about it because, dear students, it's something we all do. It's something that everybody does. So we're gonna use this to explain some racial stereotypes. Let's say Muslim terrorist or black criminal, whatever. But I want to start with a stereotype that I've been wrestling with, especially since I moved to the Pacific Northwest. And I have to be honest about it, and this is going to be on YouTube, so God, everybody's going to find out about it. Here's my stereotype. And I understand it's a stereotype, but I still hold on to it. People from the state of Washington cannot drive. They can't drive. What's wrong with people from the state of Washington? This is my stereotype. It's about a group of people, Washingtonians, and an attribute. Bad frickin' drivers. Hey, YouTube. So what that means is when we find someone that fits the stereotype, so this is going to be this category here. Yes, you're in the group. So this time it's Washington, and the attribute is bad driving. I'll just put BD. When we find someone here, yes, they're a member of the group, we freaking notice them. So, for example, if I'm driving the PCC and there's somebody stopped at a red light and they don't go when the light turns green because they're on their phone and they have Washington license plates, proof of my theory. God damn them. If I see somebody blast through a red light and they have Washington plates, proving my theory. If I see somebody driving up on a sidewalk and runs over a little dog and they've got Washington plates, they have proven my theory. I am going to notice that. I'm going to notice that because that reinforces my stereotype. I'm also then going to notice all the non-Washington, meaning Oregon, good drivers. Look at all those people with Oregon plates driving just fine. Why can't these people be more like them? They're good drivers. But here's something else that happens because we have a fourfold table. That means we've got two other things to fill up. Is that the people that belong to that group that don't fit the stereotype, I'm going to ignore them. So if I'm driving And there's lots of Washington plates when I drive, and most of them are doing absolutely nothing wrong. They're on the road, just doing fine. I don't pay any attention. I don't even see them. It's like they're invisible because they don't reinforce the stereotype. So my brain isn't looking for them to reinforce the stereotype. But here's the thing that's really interesting. If I see someone who's not in that group, for example, somebody from Washington, or excuse me, Oregon, they're somebody from Oregon, and they're a bad driver, what do I do then? I make an excuse. Oh, they're probably late to work, or they had a bad childhood, or maybe they're high. It's not because they're from Oregon that they're bad drivers. So the attribute isn't about the group, it's about the individual. So we go from macro over here, all Washington drivers are bad. There's something in the water in Washington, or they're all on meth, or they're in Oregon and they're freaking out because there's no sales tax. There's something wrong with those people. When somebody from Oregon does the exact same thing, it's not about the group that they belong to, it's something about them as an individual. It gets much more micro. Does that make sense? Do you do it? I do it all the time. I probably did it today. So if we think about a stereotype like Muslim terrorist, when somebody pops up on the news who, is trying to blow something up and their name is Muhammad, we're going to be like, well, see, proof. And then we're like, look at all the non-Muslims that aren't blowing things up. And then when we, think about the 99.999% of Muslims that aren't blowing anything up or fighting terrorism or the victims of terrorism, we don't even see them. They're completely invisible to us. We ignore them. And when someone who's not a Muslim gets busted for terrorism, some white guy, for example, we're like, oh, they're just crazy. It's not because they're white. I got in trouble. I was on some national news show, and I used the word Christian terrorist to talk about some white supremacists who belong to a sort of Christian belief. And I got so much blowback from it because it's so easy to say Muslim terrorist, even though almost all Muslims aren't engaged in any terrorism. But this guy who was a Christian terrorist, it's because he's crazy. And they're like, well, all Christians aren't terrorists. I'm like, oh, I know. Well, 99.9% of Christians are not terrorists, but this guy was a Christian terrorist. So this selective perception is really, really important. So I'm going to make sure that you know this, and I'll put up another version of this. Maybe as a screenshot or something so you can see that. So that's the second one. So first is first is socialization, second is stereotypes, third is projection. What's projection? Projection is just projecting your guilt onto other people, onto other groups of people, the things that you feel bad about. So for example, going back to the stereotype of the lazy Mexican, I live with a Mexican. I suggest everybody live with a Mexican. It's very handy because they work their asses off and do amazing work and are not lazy. Where's that stereotype come from? In fact, I've been sitting around watching my particular person who happens to be Mexican. And then I realized I'm the lazy one. I'm the one that wants to sleep in, and I'm the one that would like to have only one job. I'm projecting my guilt about being lazy onto another group of people. That's how projection works, where you're projecting sort of the way you feel bad about yourself onto other groups of people. And let me give you sort of the classic example of how projection has been used. The stereotype of the black rapist, of the black male rapist raping white women. It's been around for a while. If you ever get a chance to see Birth of a Nation, the classic 1915 epic silent film, based on a story called The Klansman. I mean, it's incredibly racist, and it's all about black men raping white women. And this is what, brought the Klan out, because there was this fear of black men raping white women. And that stereotype has been around for a long, long time. We just finished passing the anti-lynching bill. It was based on a kid in Mississippi, 60 years ago, who was lynched, a black kid, for just whistling at a white woman. So this kid named Emmett Till. I mean, that stereotype has been so powerful for over 100 years. But where did it come from? There's this great historian named Howard Zinn who did a little bit of research about this. And he figured if there is a real strong fear of black men raping white women, it must have been really hot during the slave days, because there were a lot of black men working on these plantations and a lot of white women who were living there who were often unprotected, especially during the Civil War when all the men went to fight in Gettysburg. They must have been terrified that their unprotected white women were going to be raped by these savagely sexual black men. And so Howard Zinn went back and studied all the press and the literature, the fiction and the nonfiction, nothing about black men raping white women until the end of the Civil War. Then all of a sudden this story starts to percolate about black men raping white women. And when he went to look at it, he's like, let's think about this. Before this all happened, where was the rape? Where was the interracial rape in the slavery days? Right? It was the rape of slave women by white men. I mean, this was legendary how many women were sexually assaulted by their slave masters. It's the reason there are so many complexions among African Americans, because massa was in the house, because there was just so much miscegenation and sexual assault and rape by white men of black women. So when slavery ends, then the projection starts. I'm not the rapist. They're the rapist. We weren't raping their women, they're raping our women. It was a way of flipping the guilt to make the other people feel bad. So projection is that notion of projecting your guilt. A modern version of this is when you see anti-gay politicians, all of a sudden, turns out they have a little secret that they don't tell. You know, these people come out against gay marriage and gay rights and, you know, are super conservative and beating the Bible, and all of a sudden it turns out they're gay. You know, they're projecting their guilt for themselves onto other people. So projection, that is, whatever that is, number 3. Next one is scapegoating. Scapegoating is the idea, very similar, that you are taking complex problems and blaming them on individuals. And this actually has an origin close to the name. It's an old Hebrew notion of scapegoating, where you take the sins of the tribe, the things that you've done bad all year, you put it on a goat. You have a little ritual. This goat takes our sins, and you send the goat out into the wilderness to be eaten by a lion or something. And that way you can start the year fresh. So scapegoating actually has this sort of notion of putting the goat on the sins on a goat and letting it escape. Well, you know, there is a sort of very famous version of scapegoating. It came from this little guy named Hitler, Adolf Hitler. Funny little mustache, maybe you heard of him. Germany lost the First World War, the war to end all wars, because they didn't know there was going to be a sequel. And they were very confused, and the reason they lost was very complex, right? It had to do with the end of empires and the global economy. Things were really shifting in the world, especially once America got involved. And so there was a lot of Germans who were like, what the hell happened? How did we were the mighty Germans and we lost this war? So Hitler and his little band of people said, yeah, instead of giving a very complex answer to a complex problem, I'll tell you why we lost the war. It was the Jews. Let's just blame the Jews. The Jews run the banks, and the Jews run the media, you know, capitalism and all that stuff. And so it became a very simple way to take all the sins that led to the fall of Germany in the early 1920s and put it on one group of people, the Jews, which led to the Holocaust, because the scapegoating of the Jews, which there's a long history of, made a lot more sense. And a similar version of that now is our dear president, our dear leader, blaming all our economic problems on the Mexicans, who are sending their murderers and rapists, and, you know, it's all the Mexicans. And, you know, the economy is a very complex issue, but if you can have one simple group of people to simplify it, that's going to fuel prejudice. So that's scapegoating. That's another one. So that's another term. And then another one is one that we've already talked about, which is ethnocentrism. So you'll remember, class, ethnocentrism. Remember, what is ethnocentrism? It's when we use the standards of our culture to judge another culture. Remember that discussion? So they eat weird food, they have a weird religion, they drive on the wrong side of the street, they kiss when they meet. Sorry, I don't think they can do that anymore. You know, that sort of ethnocentrism, the way we talked about how we described the Native Americans as savages and uncivilized. In fact, they were hardly uncivilized. In many ways, they were more civilized than the white people were, but we sort of judge them. So ethnocentrism, I could spend too much time on that because we've already talked about it. But the last one is ignorance. And ignorance, you know, we use ignorance as a pejorative. Hey, you're so ignorant, you're so stupid. But we're all ignorant. We're all ignorant. I was going to do this on Zoom, but I'm too dumb to figure out how to work Zoom to do this. So I went by my old standby of YouTube. Like how many languages do you not know? How many great musical factoids or sports factoids do you not know? Like we're all We're all kind of dumb. There's a lot more that you don't know than you do know, no matter how smart you are. And so there's a lot of ignorance around people who are different from us. When growing up in the South, and one of the things that white people would say is, well, when we grew up, I'm going to put my southern accent on. I swear this is just coffee. Well, we grew up, there was only white people there. We couldn't be racist because there was only white people. Darn it, we didn't have anybody to be racist to. Well, I mean, that's where the racism comes in, because you don't know any actual people of color, and therefore what fills in the void is stereotypes and misinformation and bad stuff from your crazy uncle. And, there is this sort of ignorance that fits in. I always tell the story of my grandmother in Chattanooga, Tennessee, right after 9/11 in 2001. I was visiting her, and she said some pretty horribly ignorant things about Islam that were just wrong. Even I, as a WASP kid from the South, knew were wrong. I was like, Grandma, that's not right. That's not right. So I sent her this book called Islam for Beginners. It's around here somewhere. Maybe I could find it. And she read it. She read it. She read the whole thing, and she called me up and she said, Randy, I finished reading that book and I learned so much. I'm like, what did you learn? Because for me, always trying to keep straight the sort of schism in Islam between the Shiite and the Sunni tribes. That one's always sort of, I always have to remind myself of that. She said, no, it was that Muslims worship the same God as I do. I was like, yeah, Grandma, Allah is just the Arabic word for God. It's the same story. Jesus is in the Quran. It's all part of the same family tree. It's all the same faith. And she said, yeah, I can't believe that I thought it was such a different religion. And I'm like, well, Grandma, I'm sure in Chattanooga there's a Muslim community. Why don't you go meet with them? Because you have a similar faith tradition. And so my little grandma, who's about this big, by the time she was in her 90s, went and knocked on the door of the local mosque in Chattanooga. Hello? Are there any Muslims here? And they took her in and gave her a tour of the mosque, and they started a kind of interfaith fellowship with her Presbyterian church, just because she was so ignorant that she let all the crap about Sharia law and all the stuff. She was watching a lot of Fox News, so a lot of that stuff just got piped in. And once she actually started meeting some people and having fellowship with some Muslim folks, a lot of that ignorance went away, which is good news, because that means we can fix it, right? We can fix it with knowledge. We can fix it with education. And the good news is that we can fix all of these things: socialization, stereotypes, projection, scapegoating, ethnocentrism. I had to peek. And ignorance. We can fix all those things. That's good news. Okay. That's the end of that point. Told you it was a bunch. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Blazak. Always love when I get to mention my grandma. She was an amazing woman. She was undercover in the FBI when she was young, helping to catch prostitute pimps. My grandma was on a train to a house in New Orleans catching pimps for the FBI. That's pretty cool. All right. Coming up next is kind of a big section. We're going to talk about the historical origin of this concept of racism, and then this really important discussion about assimilation and pluralism, why America is so divided. So it's sort of two little lectures in one, and that's coming up next. Stay tuned.